The furnace had been making that sound again, a low, rattling hum that started sometime around 3 in the morning and woke me before my alarm. I lay there in the dark listening to it, thinking I should have called someone about it weeks ago. That's the thing about living alone after 67 years of keeping a house running. You start letting the small things slide. I got up, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window watching the snow come down on the backyard. February in Sudbury does that to you. The light comes in gray and flat, and the world outside looks like it's been pressed under glass. I had nowhere to be until noon. My daughter and her husband were coming for lunch. I told myself that was a good thing. My daughter's name is Joanna. She's 41, sharp like her mother was, and she married a man named Clifford 6 years ago. Clifford. I never said anything to Joanna about the way I felt about him. You don't. He was polite at dinners, asked about my work before I retired, called me by my first name, Norman, the way young men do now when they want to seem casual in clothes without having earned either. He sold commercial real estate. He made good money, or so I assumed. He wore the kind of shoes that cost $400 and look exactly like shoes that cost $60. The furnace kept humming. I called Terry Szymanski that morning. We've been friends since the early 90s. He used to run an HVAC company out of Lively before he semi-retired and handed it to his nephew. He said he'd come by around 10, take a look before my company arrived. I said fine, put on a second pot of coffee, and went to shovel the front walk. Terry showed up at 10 past 10 in his nephew's truck, stomping snow off his boots at the door the way he always has, like he's trying to punish the mat. We shook hands and I led him down to the basement. He pulled the front panel off the furnace and crouched down with a flashlight. I stayed back and let him work. I was looking at the old shelving unit along the far wall. Boxes from when I moved out of the house on Elm after Carolyn passed. Medical records. Old tax files, some of Joanna's childhood things I never had the heart to sort through, and then I noticed something that hadn't been there the last time I was down here. A laptop bag, black, propped against the wall behind one of the boxes, mostly hidden. I didn't own a laptop bag. My laptop was upstairs on the kitchen table, and it came in a gray sleeve. I pulled it out. The bag was Clifford's. I recognized the small silver monogram clip on the front zipper. The same bag I'd seen him carry to Sunday dinners when he said he had to check something for work. Terry, I said, hold on a minute. I unzipped it. Inside was a laptop, a charging cable, and a brown envelope that wasn't sealed. I slid out the papers inside. There were 3 of them. The first was a printout, a life insurance policy. My name was at the top. The beneficiary line had been changed. It no longer said Joanna Ann Rutherford. It said Joanna and Clifford Rutherford, joint. I didn't understand what I was looking at, not fully, not yet. The second page was a photocopy of what looked like a financial power of attorney document. My signature was at the bottom. I had never signed that document. Terry had gone quiet behind me. I turned around, and he was standing there, not looking at the furnace anymore. Norman, he said carefully, can I see that? I handed him the pages. He read them slowly. He's not a man who rushes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, you need to call your lawyer before they get here for lunch. I told him that was 2 hours away. He said, I know. I asked him what the second document meant exactly. The power of attorney. He's not a lawyer. But Terry Szymanski is 70 years old and has been around long enough to know what a forged signature is used for. It means, he said, that someone can make financial decisions on your behalf, sell property, move money, without asking you. I stood there in my own basement holding papers I had never seen before, with my name on them, under a buzzing fluorescent light that I'd been meaning to replace since October. Go upstairs, Terry said. I'll finish here. Call Don Petrie. Don Petrie is my lawyer. He's handled my estate planning since Carolyn died. I went upstairs and called him from the kitchen, standing at the window again, watching the snow that hadn't stopped. Don picked up on the 3rd ring. I described what I had found. He was quiet for a moment and then said, Don't let on that you know anything. Can you do that? I said I didn't know. He said, Take photos of everything on your phone right now and send them to me. Then put the bag back exactly where you found it. I did what he told me. Joanna and Clifford arrived at 12:15. Joanna came in first, stomping her boots the same way Terry had, kissing my cheek and asking how I was sleeping. She looked tired herself. She'd lost weight since Christmas, I thought. Or maybe the winter light just does that. Clifford came in behind her, carrying a bottle of Pinot Gris he said was from a winery in the Okanagan. He handed it to me with a smile that reached his eyes perfectly. It always did. We had soup and bread. I had made chicken soup from scratch the day before, the kind Carolyn used to make, with barley and carrots cut thick. Clifford had 2 bowls and said it was the best he'd ever had. I watched him. I watched Joanna. I looked for something I hadn't been looking for before. I don't know what I expected. Some sign, some slip. There was nothing. They were exactly as they always were. That's the part that stays with me, even now. How ordinary it all looked. After lunch, Clifford offered to help clean up. He washed the pot while I dried, and Joanna sat at the table with her phone. We talked about nothing. A road project on the highway into town. A restaurant downtown that had closed. Normal conversation. The kind you have 100 times. When they left, I stood at the door, washed the car back out of the driveway. Joanna waved from the passenger window. I waved back. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, and I didn't move for a long time. In the days that followed, Don Petrie moved quickly and quietly. He brought in a colleague who specialized in estate fraud. Together they contacted the bank, TD, where I've had my checking and savings since 1987, and flagged the accounts without alerting anyone. The financial power of attorney document, when examined properly, showed inconsistencies in the signature. Don told me it was almost certainly done by tracing. My real signature, from something I'd signed years ago, overlaid and copied. The life insurance policy change was more straightforward. Whoever had requested it had done so in writing, using a notarized letter. The notary was a name I didn't recognize. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit got involved. I won't pretend I understood everything that was happening. There were phone calls and meetings and documents, and I was asked to sign my name, my real name, on things I understood, and I did. What I did understand was this. Over the previous 8 months, Clifford had been building a case for my gradual incapacitation. He had told Joanna's family doctor, a man named Dr. Harding, who I had met once at a Christmas party, that I had been showing signs of memory loss. He had not examined me. He had no clinical basis for this, but he had said it. Informally to Joanna more than once, in a way that planted a seed. The plan, as investigators later pieced it together, was this. Once the power of attorney was established as legitimate, Clifford would use it to begin liquidating my assets. The house on Lakeshore Road, which I have owned outright since 1999, is worth just over $800,000 in today's market. My RSP accounts, built over 35 years, hold another $420,000. He knew the numbers. He had asked once 2 years ago in what seemed like casual conversation over dinner. I had told him I thought I was being open with family. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. Sitting in Dawn's office or driving home along a road gone gray and slushy with the end of winter, I thought about the exact moment I had given Clifford those numbers. I had been proud, I think, the way a man is proud of what he has built slowly and without shortcuts. I wanted my daughter's husband to see that. I wanted him to know her father had taken care of things. It had not occurred to me that he was writing it down. The investigation took 4 months. I was not arrested. Clifford was. The officers came to their house on a Tuesday afternoon in June, while Joanna was at work. She called me from the driveway of their house on Cameron Street, her voice shaking in a way I had never heard from her before, and asked me what was happening. I drove over. We sat on the porch together and I told her everything. All of it, from the basement and the bag to Don Petrie and the RCMP. She didn't say anything for a long time. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started and stopped. "Did you know?" I asked her. I had to ask. Dawn had advised me not to, but I had to. She looked at me and I saw her mother in her face right then. The particular way Carolyn had of looking at you when something cost her something to say. "No," she said, "I didn't know." I believed her. I still do. What I learned later, and what the investigation confirmed, was that Clifford had kept Joanna deliberately at arm's length from the details. He had framed his concerns about my memory to her as worry, as care, as the kind of thing a devoted son-in-law does when he sees his wife's aging father showing signs. He had recruited her empathy. He had used the love she had for me as cover. There's a kind of evil in that I find difficult to name. Joanna separated from him before the trial. She moved into the Laurentian University area with a friend and later into a rental on Regent Street. We had dinner most Sundays that summer. We didn't talk about Clifford much. We talked about her mother, about the house, about whether she wanted to keep some of the furniture when I eventually moved somewhere smaller. Normal things. Things you talk about when you are trying to remember who you are to each other outside of what someone else did. The trial was held in November at the Sudbury Courthouse on Elm Street. I sat in the gallery on the first day and watched Clifford walk in wearing a dark suit and an expression I recognized. The same one he'd had at every dinner, composed and calibrated, designed to read as reasonable. His lawyer was good. She worked hard. It didn't matter. The evidence was substantial. The forged document, the insurance change, the notary who, under questioning, admitted that the meeting had been brief and that the man presenting the identification had not resembled the description on file. Phone records showed communications with a financial advisor in Mississauga who was separately charged. Text messages between Clifford and this advisor included explicit discussions of timeline, of my age, of anticipated asset values. On the third day of the trial, during cross-examination, the Crown prosecutor asked Clifford directly why he had stored the laptop bag in my basement rather than his own home or office. Clifford paused for a long moment. Then he said, "I thought it would be safe there." Safe there, in my basement, in my house, among the boxes I hadn't opened since my wife died. The courtroom was quiet. I watched the jurors' faces. I watched one woman in the second row, probably mid-50s, write something down on her notepad and underline it. On the fourth day, Clifford's lawyer surprised everyone by announcing he would address the court personally before sentencing. His lawyer tried to dissuade him. He spoke anyway. He talked about not being enough, about marrying into a family where everything was already built and solid and accounted for, where the history was thick and the love was old, and he had always been the one who arrived after the story had started. He said I was a good man. He said that clearly, looking at me from the stand, and that was part of why he had done what he did. Because he had believed that I would never suspect someone who told me I mattered. I don't know what he expected that to accomplish. Maybe absolution, maybe just to be heard. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in a federal correctional facility, plus 3 years of supervised probation. Restitution was ordered. The forged power of attorney was formally voided. The insurance beneficiary was restored. I walked out of that courthouse on a cold Thursday in November, down the front steps and onto Elm Street, and stood there for a minute in the wind. People walked past. Traffic moved. A streetlight came on early because the sky had gone dark with clouds. Don Petrie walked out behind me and put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. I called Joanna from the car. She was at work. She answered in a low voice, and I said, "It's done." She said okay. She said she'd come for dinner Sunday. I said I'd make the soup again. I drove home along Lakeshore Road, past the lake that was already starting to freeze at the edges, thin gray ice reaching out from the shore like a hand. The house was quiet when I got in. I hung up my coat. I put the kettle on. Terry called that evening to ask how it had gone. I told him. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Good." Just that one word, the way Terry always does when a thing is settled. I've thought a lot about what I would have done if he hadn't come that morning. If the furnace hadn't been making that sound. If I hadn't called him instead of just turning the heat up and waiting for spring. These things turn on such small moments. A noise in the night, a bag left in the wrong corner of a basement by a man who had calculated everything except the fact that I still knew how to maintain my own house. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a house I built a life in. I know where every creak in the floor is. I know when the light is wrong. I know what belongs in my basement and what doesn't. That, in the end, is what he forgot to account for. I keep coming back to the furnace, that raveling sound at 3 in the morning that I had been ignoring for weeks. I almost didn't call Terry that day. I almost just turned the heat up and told myself I'd deal with it in spring. And if I had done that, if I had let another week go by, I don't know where I'd be now. Probably still making soup for a man who was counting my square footage. There's a kind of reckoning that happens when you survive something like this. Not a dramatic one. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes slowly, the way February ends in northern Ontario, a degree at a time. Barely noticeable until one morning you realize the ice on the lake has pulled back from the shore. What I learned about Clifford is that he was patient. He had been patient for years. He smiled at dinners. He washed pots. He held doors. And the whole time, underneath all of it, he was doing arithmetic. My house, my accounts, my age, my trust. That kind of patience in the service of something wrong is its own kind of rot. It looks like character from the outside. It holds its shape right up until it doesn't. I've thought about what I could have done differently. And honestly, not much. You cannot build a wall against someone you love's husband. You cannot treat every kind gesture like evidence. What I could do, what I did, was stay sharp. Stay present in my own house. Know what belonged in my basement and what didn't. That attentiveness, the kind that comes from living deliberately and not letting yourself go soft just because you're past 65, that's what saved me. Not luck, not instinct, just the habit of paying attention. Joanna asked me once, after the trial, if I was angry. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said I was something. Not quite anger, more like a long, steady grief for the version of things I had believed in, that her marriage was good, that the family around my table was solid, that the people who said they cared about me meant it the way I meant it when I said it back. But grief moves. It has to. You either let it move or it sets in and hardens, and you spend the rest of your years suspicious of everyone who knocks on your door. I refused that. It required something from me, a decision, made consciously more than once, to not let what Clifford did become the lens through which I saw everything else. That's not forgiveness in any soft sense of the word. It's just not letting someone who already took enough take more. Don Petrie told me, after the sentencing, that most cases like mine don't get resolved the way mine did. Most of the time, the documents go through. The assets move. By the time anyone notices, it's too late. The difference, he said, was that I had kept my accounts in order, knew my own paperwork, had a lawyer I'd been working with for years, and had a friend who had the sense to say, call him now, instead of, let's wait and see. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not fear, not suspicion. Just the quiet, consistent work of knowing your own life, your finances, your documents, your house, the people you've chosen to trust and why. The clarity to act when something doesn't sit right, even when acting means turning towards something you'd rather not look at directly, and the steadiness afterward to keep going, to make the soup. To call your daughter on Sunday, to let the ice recede and trust that the water underneath it has been there all along, solid and deep, and yours.